Welcome, Min. Thank you so much for joining us for our 37th episode of YCP's virtual monthly series, Refiner's Fire, where Catholic business leaders from diverse industries share professional and spiritual wisdom in short 30-minute live sessions. In spite of the short length of those segments, we hope the tips and insights will be extremely powerful for all of us as we strive to work in witness for Christ. The name of our micro interview series, Refiner's Fire, actually comes from scripture, from Malachi chapter 3, verse 2, where we learn that God is like a refiner's fire, who seeks to purify us and make us the best we can be. And that's the whole point of this series. Through the inspiration and wisdom of these exceptional Catholic leaders, we are challenged to improve in small ways in our professional and spiritual lives. So let's be open to this journey of refinement so that in everything we do it aiming for that higher standard of excellence that gives glory to God. Our topic this month is beauty at work, how beauty works and shapes the work that we do. Dr. Brandon will discuss why beauty is not just a word we typically associate with work and how it can actually be a powerful lens through which to recognize the presence of God in our work lives. And I can't think of a better person to talk to about this than Dr. Brandon Vaidyanathan. Dr. Brandon is the Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Sociology and Director of the Institutional Flourishing Lab at the Catholic University of America. And Dr. Brandon, welcome in. We are extremely honored to have you here today.
Hey, thank you, Derek. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to waste anybody's time, so I'll kind of just jump right into it. But I would love for you to see if you could break down why this topic of beauty of work is so important to you, and also with young Catholics in the workplaces, everybody tuning in, is how can we learn to really recognize beauty in our daily work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not a word that I paid much attention to until very recently. I'm a sociologist, and so for a number of years, have been interested in studying meaningful work. What is meaningful work? And this pursuit I got into from the very beginning of my academic career, from when I was an undergrad, starting out, and just after my conversion to Catholicism, which happened about 25 years ago. I was in university. And like many Indians who come to North America, I was initially pursuing computer science and wanted to be like a computer engineer, computer scientist. And I saw just a lot of people miserable in their jobs. And I had taken for granted that, look, work is just something that is a means to an end. It's a necessary evil. And of course, it's supposed to suck. But, it's just supposed to be something that you do for the sake of making money, and maybe you have a vocation to your family, or maybe you have some other kind of higher purpose, but work is simply instrumental to that. And I didn't find that satisfactory. And I spent, really since then, I've been trying to understand what meaningful work looks like in different fields. What are the obstacles to it? What are the factors that contribute to it, particularly in terms of organizational culture, whether it's in business or religion or in science? And it was only about 5 years ago when I started talking to scientists, trying to understand how people who dedicated their lives to science managed to endure really long hours in the lab, sometimes spending 12, 14 hours at work, giving up their health, giving up lucrative jobs. So these are not industry scientists I was talking to people like working, trying to study some protein in a laboratory in a university, and not somebody working for Google making a lot of money. They don't, they really have to sacrifice, given how smart they are, a lucrative career somewhere else. They sometimes sacrifice their families, given the amount of time they're spending at work. And I want to know, why do they do what they do? And many of them, I was surprised to hear, would say it's because it's beautiful. It's not a word I would have associated with science. My experience of doing physics and chemistry and biology was not beautiful. But the more I heard from them, the more I understood their stories and their insights into what beauty looks like in their work, and what do they mean by it. I started to recognize that this is something that's pervasive in all kinds of fields of work. That beauty is not just simply the beauty of a sunset or the beauty of a pretty face, but there are aesthetic properties in the work we do. And I can say more about what those things are, but they're things that pull us out of ourselves. They're things that contribute to our flourishing, and most of us are not paying attention to it. And so that kind of that's what got me into this journey and trying to understand what beauty means. And for the scientists we talked to, we found three main types of beauty. There was the sensory beauty of the stars or cells under a microscope, or there's the kind of beauty that is in an elegant equation that you and I may not be able to perceive it because we just see some Greek characters, but for them it's immensely meaningful, and it's really a shortcut to truth. And there's the beauty of understanding, which is the third kind, which is that insight into how reality works, into the hidden order or inner logic behind things, right? So there were those three kinds of beauty that animated scientists, and then I started talking to cocktail bar owners and entrepreneurs and athletes and musicians and lawyers. Believe it or not, there's beauty in the law, and I found other kinds of beauty, and I've been doing that through a podcast and a YouTube channel for the last year or so. So that's really been the journey I've been on this project.
That's amazing. And I appreciate you going into detail and sharing that, because I think for me and so many others, before we had chatted initially, I had never associated that word beauty with what we do. And I know when we initially chatted, really understanding like how do we as young Catholic professionals, make what we do a thing of beauty. And I'm curious if you might be able to break down a little bit more, like within the workplace, whether we're working at an actual office or working from home, like how can we look for those small things in our day that help us through, the sensory beauty, the elegance, the understanding. Could you break that down a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one thing to note is, even those of us who are, committed and faithful, typically don't associate beauty with work. And often I think there's two kinds of reduction that happen, right? One is that we reduce, um, I think many of us Catholics tend to do this. We reduce beauty to sacred art and sacred music and sacred architecture and say, like, that's, you know, Palestrina or something, like that's beauty. And I think that's too narrow. I think that we're missing something important, because beauty is a transcendental. It's a property of being, and it's the attractiveness of reality, right? So everything that exists in some way possesses and participates in beauty, just as it does in truth and goodness. Um, and we're closing ourselves off by reducing it to ways in which God wants to speak to us, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing is the reduction of faith to ethics and morality, and Pope Benedict talks a lot about this, and I think we tend to do this often at work. We think that our integrating our faith in work is simply a matter of, like, don't cheat, don't steal, pray at work, don't make moral compromises. That's all good, it's all true, but there's more, right? And I think opening ourselves up to beauty, like, beauty gives us a lens to reimagine what work can look like. It gives us a way to think about, and you talked about in your introduction, excellence, right? So think about what it is to make something well, whether it's a spreadsheet or any kind of object or a service that you deliver. What is, for the ancient Greeks, the word that they used for beauty is the same as the word for admiration, right? Kalon, which is that which is beautiful is that which is admirable. So what does it mean to produce something that's admirable? How do we do that? And what are the processes that are required to make something that is excellent, that is admirable? And what are the things that we ourselves are drawn to? What are the people, the behaviors, the habits, the products that we ourselves are drawn to that are admirable? So not all of those things are aligned with truth and goodness, by the way, right? So beauty can be seductive. You can think of David and Bathsheba, right? So beauty is not always aligned with truth or with goodness, but it's always affecting us. And if we're not paying attention to it, it's a problem, both from the perspective of we're not allowing God to speak to us, but also we may be being misled. So that's kind of what I want to draw our attention to, is that beauty is really important and we can't do without it. As human beings, we are moved by things that are beautiful. We have to pay attention to it. We have to harness it. We got to be careful about how we do that. Be intentional about it. And it's a part of it. I mean, it affects our brains. There are three systems in our brain that actually, like, in terms of this, in the title of this episode, we talked about how beauty works. There's the sensory motor system that allows us to be attentive to sensory experiences, sights and sounds. There's an emotional system, right? So there are things that we delight in, that we experience joy in. And then there's a meaning making system, and beauty has to do with all three of those things. It's an emergent property of all those three things, and we encounter all those things at work. We encounter the sunlight coming through a window. We encounter a sense of maybe being edified by someone's behavior in the workplace, who maybe is exemplifying a way of being virtuous that we ourselves should aspire to. And then there's the meaning making system, in terms of maybe there's a way to think about the work you're doing as meaningful. Or what is the beauty in the kind of the purpose or mission that you could be serving, right? So So those are some of the ways in which we could start to think about beauty and pay attention to it.
Beautiful. No, I appreciate you diving deeper into that. And before we hop into the next question, just a reminder for our listeners that we'll soon be taking questions from Brandon Live. So be thinking of any question that you may have and post them in the chat, and we will get to them shortly. And there was something you mentioned there that really kind of caught my attention. You had mentioned beauty isn't always aligned with truth and goodness, but it still affects us. And it's something that I didn't really think of to now, because you may just think of beauty in this kind of scope of like beauty is always good. And when it's not always aligned with truth and goodness, but it still affects us. Like, is there a specific example that you can give to kind of break that down a little bit more for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, the clearest one, one example I'd given was David and Bathsheba. We could be misled by, just the sense of this person is so beautiful. So there's the established field of research that shows that we have this pervasive beauty is good bias. So when we see someone who's attractive, we think that they're morally good, and it's evolutionarily a deep rooted bias that we share across cultures, across civilizations. And so people who are better looking get paid a lot more, they get promoted a lot more. There's a ton of research on this that I'd be happy to direct people to. And conversely, like people who have like a physical deformity, like a scar on their face, they're immediately seen as morally suspect. But one of the people who I really admire is a neuroscientist who studies beauty, Anjan Chatterjee, and he points out, if you look at like Lion King, even the villain doesn't even have a name; it's Scar, right? So we're like, that's the thing that we're hardwired to do, and that's a very common problem in workplaces. That people who are better looking or better dressed or who are aesthetically somehow more pleasing can get away with being somehow less than excellent and sometimes even immoral, right? So they have this sway over us. You think of like the Elizabeth, what's her name, with Theranos, the very deceptive CEO of this company, right? So that's one way. There are other like more peculiar ways in which even scientists are misled by beautiful equations. They think that they're true because they're really beautiful. They're like, it's so beautiful, it must be true. And that's a source of bias that can mislead us. And so you can think of, if you're an entrepreneur and you have this brilliant idea and it's this really elegant solution, you think this is going to work. This is going to have to solve the problem because it's so elegant. But maybe not, right? So we need to be careful and really sort of test the things that we think are beautiful. Are they good? Are they true? Right? So that's really critical.
Yeah, I thank you for that explanation, because it helps me even think of things that we may initially think is just beauty and good, but once you start looking through that lens you talk about and really understand, like, is this actually inherently good for me or not? Once you kind of take that deeper dive and really kind of adjust the lens based on that. So I appreciate you breaking it down. Another question I have, which is something that was intriguing to me, but also to a lot of members of our audience that I know that they deal with on a daily basis, is on this kind of topic of beauty and also burnout as well too.
Yeah.
And so many of us at some point, if we haven't already, will at some point of our life struggle with burnout or kind of inefficiencies in our work. But in your experience, can you briefly explain how potentially recognizing beauty in our work environment, whether in an office or at home, or even in the people around us that we work with, or even through a conversation like this, can really help us create healthier work scenarios and find a deeper meaning to that beauty in our professional lives?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is something we find in our research. We've studied scientists around the world and the role of beauty in the practice of science, and we find that the more frequently you experience beauty, the better your well-being, and that is controlling for all kinds of factors across nationalities, across disciplines, across gender, etc. So beauty really matters for mental health and for well-being and for a sense of flourishing. And it has to do with those three systems I mentioned, particularly with the meaning-making system. That a sense of meaning and purpose is really critical to our well-being. And burnout is there are different definitions of burnout, different ways to measure it. Often we think of emotional exhaustion, right? Like feeling that I just can't bring myself to go to work. When I think of work, I feel emotionally fatigued. Burnout is typically not just overwork, right? Like, because if you have a strong sense of purpose, you can work a lot. Like you can spend an entire day working and not feel fatigued emotionally. That sense of being drained is often because of some kind of mismatch between what it is you feel called to, what it is you value, and then the resources available to you or the actual experience that you have that is afforded to you at work, right? So that mismatch is often what creates burnout. And for many of us, burnout comes in the form of a kind of death by a thousand paper cuts. So it's like a bunch of small negative experiences piling up, right? Inefficiencies here and there, this bad interaction with this person doesn't value what I do, this thing goes wrong because these resources aren't there they're supposed to be. And so those things pile up, and then it just becomes insufferable. So you can think of beauty as offering something like the opposite of that, right? So what is the opposite of death by a thousand paper cuts? One of the frameworks I suggest is think of beauty in 5 aspects of your work, or maybe 5 pillars of beauty. So there's a sense of purpose, the why behind what you do, and can you find something beautiful in that purpose? Like, what would a beautiful purpose be? What would you and don't think too much about how do I define beauty and what does that mean. What resonates for you when you think of what would be for me a beautiful purpose or a beautiful mission to commit my working life to, right? And what does that activate for you? And where do you find that in your current work environment, or is there a beauty in the mission and purpose of your organization that's something that you find admirable? Then there's beauty in the what you're doing or the process, and that's kind of often where burnout happens. And sometimes we work in ways that are inefficient and in ways that are conducive to burning out. So if you've got like 10 tabs open on your screen and you're constantly going between your email and then the document you're supposed to be writing and then watching some video, like going back and forth like that is actually not very conducive to productive work. So there are programs like some of your listeners may know Optimal Work by Kevin Majors, the psychiatrist, that suggest a way to work in which you can experience beauty. You've probably heard of Cal Newport's idea of deep work, and that's another kind of approach to this. So there are ways in which we can work that would be conducive to like what would think again, like what is at the end of the day, what would allow you to say, I worked in a way that I think was beautiful, right? Like, what would that look like for you? And maybe for some people that might mean being locked up in a room for 6 hours with no distractions. And for other people, might be I'm in a coffee shop with a lot of energy. It's buzzing. It's really energetic. And that's where I really feel motivated to do the work. And maybe for the same person, at certain times of day, you need more quiet. And certain times of day, you need more activity, right? So, but it's figuring out, it's a bit of knowing yourself and what really resonates for me. So that's the second thing, the process. The third one is the product. Like, what is the outcome you're developing, and what would a beautiful product, or if it's a service, right? What is a beautiful result for you? And I don't mean perfect, because it could be imperfect, but what is it? What is something that you would think is edifying, that maybe brings delight to someone else, that solves a problem in a way that's elegant. There's beauty in the people you work with, the people you serve, and I don't mean like the physical beauty part. What I mean is the beauty of harmonious interactions, of energetic, engaging with people in a way that's authentic, in a way that energizes you, that doesn't leave you feeling drained, that is life giving to others, in a way that you recognize you've made an authentic contribution to improving someone's life in some way, or helping someone's day in some way. And then finally, there's beauty simply in the place, right? In whether it's the visual aspect or the auditory aspect of it. We're human beings. We need sunlight. We need green space, and so even having a plant or a window makes a huge difference for experiencing that kind of beauty. But the more of those kinds of experiences you have, the more it's possible for you to encounter beauty in your work.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing all those, and it actually looks like a lot of the pillars may have inspired some questions from the audience as well too, because I know there's so much we could dive into there, but we have a couple audience questions that I would love to take first and see what they came up with for you. So let's see here from Chrism Studio. People love sacred art but don't want to pay for the time and skill it took to create it. How can we educate others that supporting artists creating beautiful things is worth it? Awesome question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, and I think it is a task of education, right? And I think part of it might simply be to build relationships between artists and the people who are benefiting from the art, right? For them to understand. So I won't know how to value the time and skill it takes to create something, unless maybe I spend some time, understanding, wow, this is a challenging process. It takes materials, it takes a lot of work. So I do think building those relationships and helping people understand what the process looks like, and how to value something, right, I think is something that requires education. So I would try to think of what are ways in which one could create more opportunities for artists and their and then their supporters to connect and learn more about the process.
On top of that, do you think it also makes sense to, if you can in person or even some way, understand more about the artist as well too? Do you think there's a piece in that, if you can understand that person as well in their heart and what the Lord has guided them to in creating this beautiful art, do you think there's a piece in that could help them discover that as well?
Yeah, that's what I mean by those connections, right? So for them to have that sense of who this person is to, and what it why behind what they're doing and who that person is, and then the process that it takes. But I mean, I think we're typically willing to support people we know compared to people we don't know, and so allowing us insights into who these artists are, what's guiding them, and then the concrete details of what it takes to produce something like this. But it's not just the cost of materials and supplies, right? Because there's works of art that one might say objectively are they're not beautiful, but they're valued very high, right? But a lot of works of contemporary art are there's very peculiar kind of judgment of creativity. So there's also an aspect of a community that has to value it. So it's not just individuals, but it has to be, the way we value things is usually because other people value them, right? I'm willing to pay a lot of money for something because other people that I respect are willing to pay a lot of money for it. So there's that whole kind of mimetic effect around the valuation of something, which is why I think, again, that connection to an artist has to be not just one-on-one, but you have to have multiple, many people who value that, who can amplify the value of something is necessary.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks again for the question. Let's take another one from the audience here. So from Emma M, how can we find the beauty in our own work?
Yeah, I think those 5 pillars that I suggested would be a good place to start. And I think one of the things, I've got some tools, like I have a workbook that I'm making available to YCP members, and that might be a sort of reflection exercise that could allow you to sit with those 5 pillars in terms of, what is a beautiful purpose for me? Where do I encounter it? What is a beautiful process, a way of working that I find admirable and excellent? Where in my own experience do I find, that was an experience of working that I found beautiful, right? So it takes some time to do that kind of work. And I think for most of us, if we sit and just simply reflect on, like, what for me would make this work day beautiful, something comes to your mind. There's some image, there's some sensation, identify that and then test it. Go ahead and check it out. Maybe you're mistaken. Maybe you say, I thought it was this, I tried it out, it didn't work, but maybe it's this other thing, right? I really think beauty is inescapable. It's going to haunt us. It's going to, even if you try something and it doesn't work, the next day something else will strike you. Our imaginations are constantly working. Our creativity is infinite. So I think those are, and I would say pray, ask the Lord for beauty too. It is, I'm convinced it is a way through which He wants to guide us through the way of beauty. Especially with so much ugliness in our world. So I think some of those steps would help give you some insights into where you can find. And it doesn't have to be everywhere. It could be just in a few things, but there could be enough sustenance in those things to really animate everything else.
As soon as you had brought up beauty is inescapable, the first thing that came to mind was when you said, when we're talking about burnout, that it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And the first thing that came to mind was, how can I find beauty in that? How can I find beauty in the burnout that I may be going through? How can I find beauty in the burnout of maybe me getting into an argument with a coworker that might be upset because I didn't meet a deadline, whatever that might be? But really looking at that and taking that negative, taking the positive, some beauty, and really understand, where can I find that through that? So I think that beauty is inescapable is a beautiful way to put that.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that there won't be those negative aspects, or there won't be ugliness, or whatever the opposite of beauty might be, right? I mean, that might still very much be there. and maybe you did have an ugly, interaction with your colleague. Maybe I was ugly in my interaction with my colleague. Maybe I was the problem, right? I mean, that's fine, but like, let's look for where the beauty is as well, right? I'm not saying we should deny. You may be in workplaces where there's unethical behavior. You may be in workplaces where the products they make are objectively bad and break all the time. But that's beauty's not going to solve that problem. But it can guide you to other things, and I think it can help you know you better. It can help you know yourself better, and it can help guide you to what is it that I'm really called to. Like, where is it that the Lord is leading me in the world in terms of what I can serve and contribute, and what resonates with me in terms of the contribution I can make, and what energizes me, right? So it can help you identify and discern those things as well.
Awesome. It looks like we have 2 more questions from the audience here, so let's get to the next one from Pascal. Really great content here, and I like what you mentioned about testing beauty. How dangerous or helpful is relativism in our interaction with beauty? Thinking about ugly architecture here.
Yeah. Hey, Pascal, good to hear from you. Yeah, look, I mean, this is really a great question, right? So I would say, think of beauty not as a 0-1 thing, right? So think of beauty as a continuum, and there's some things that are more beautiful than others. And I think even ugly architecture, one might say, has a certain aspect of beauty, right? You might say it's still at least functional. It is maybe an imposing structure that is daunting is what it's supposed to be. But I think trying to sort of figure out, like, how can we say there's got to be more, right? That this is not, this is good, but it's not good enough. That as humans we're drawn to more, and particularly as people of faith, we ought to bring more into the world, and we ought to sort of try to create environments that are not just sort of bare bones, or sort of meeting principles of functionality or efficiency. They're not just sort of expressive in an emotional sense, right? Even those things are fine; those are good. I mean, there's some kind of art. There are kinds of art that are purely meant to be expressive. That's fine. I think you can add beauty as a criterion that is also an important human universal, and say, well, what if it were also beautiful, right? I mean, we don't have to denigrate those other things. You don't want beauty without functionality, right? In architecture, or even in the products you're making. And by suggesting it as an addition, I don't mean it's simply trivial. What I mean is that it is something that is part of what makes us human, and is really important to us as human beings. And our culture and our society we've trained ourselves to devalue it for various reasons. Maybe because we've associated beautiful art with wealthy social classes and aristocracy, and we want a more egalitarian society. Blah blah blah. There's so many reasons why we've historically moved away from valuing beauty. I think we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, and I think that once you start to propose things in the world, introduce things into the world that are beautiful, I think it will resonate with people. And I am seeing in my research too around the world that there is a kind of hunger for beauty, and there's almost a movement, especially in architecture, actually, where there's more and more designers and architects that are gravitating back to the concept of beauty, and trying to bring that into the work they're doing.
Awesome. Thanks again for your question, Pascal. It looks like we got time for one more question from the audience. So from Ava Ludwig, should we try to fix the ugly or place our focus on the beautiful?
Great question. That's a both end. I think, fix the ugly as much as you can. And one of the things I suspect is that focusing on the beautiful can energize you, right? So if there is ugliness in your workplace, in terms of, maybe you, look, you have to think about your sphere of influence and what you can fix and what you can't fix too. We've got to be realistic about some of those things. But I think too many of us, and I come from a field in sociology where a lot of our focus is on critique, and it's only on critique. We only point out what's wrong with the world, what's all the injustice and oppressive structures, and the problems that have to be fixed, and so on. And inevitably we end up generating solutions that are themselves going to create more problems. But I think that is a recipe for burnout. And I think that if we start to look at, well, what is working? Where is there some beauty in the world? Where is there some light? Where is there some radiance? Where do we find some kind of harmony, some kind of symmetry, some kind of elegance? paying attention to those things is energizing. St. Paul says, in Philippians, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is good, whatsoever is beautiful, try to test those things, right? So you focus on that, but that doesn't mean to focus on that alone. We do have to try to rectify what's wrong, but I have a bit of a fear that focusing too much on the ugly can drain us. If we focus exclusively on the beautiful, I think that's also a little bit Pollyanna-ish, and I think that's not quite right either. I think we can be energized by what's beautiful in order to be drawn to what's true and what's good, and to live out our calling more fully.
Awesome. Thanks again for the question, Ava. And it looks like we have gotten to time here in the podcast, and I just wanted to thank everybody for their awesome questions here today. And Brandon, also just a huge thank you to you for your advice on this topic today, and really understanding how we could bring beauty into work, and also just your leadership and just your Catholic witness, which I know has inspired me today and so many of us. So we really appreciate your time, and just thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Derek.
Yeah.